You know, I was not the mayor on 9/11. Our administration took office the following January. But the efforts of 9/11 have been a major focus of our administration over the last 15 months. We have examined the city's response to 9/11 thoroughly, and I can tell you that it was swift, massive, heroic, and extraordinarily effective. Within 10 minutes of the first attack at 8:46 a.m., 50% of the police department's special operation units were deployed and were either at or on their way to the World Trade Center. By 9 a.m., before the second plane even hit, both the fire department and our emergency medical services had command posts on the scene directing rescue operations. By 9:10 a.m., less than half an hour after the first tower was struck, 100% of the fire department's rescue and high-rise units had been ordered into action. Police officers immediately secured the perimeter around the World Trade Center, and police emergency service units entered the towers to assist in evacuations. Department of Health officials started considering public health effects and began contacting area hospitals to establish procedures for accepting the heavy influx of injured people that was anticipated.
The World Trade Center complex was built for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Construction began in 1966, and tenants began to occupy its space in 1970. Twin Towers came to occupy a unique and symbolic place in the culture of New York City and America. The World Trade Center actually consisted of 7 buildings, including one hotel spread across 16 acres of land. Buildings were connected by an underground mall, the Concourse. The Twin Towers, World Trade Center 1 and World Trade Center 2, known as the North Tower and South Tower, were the signature structures containing 10.4 million square feet of office space. Both towers at 110 stories were about 1,350 feet high and were square, each wall measuring 208 feet in length. On any given workday, up to 50,000 office workers occupied the towers, and 40,000 people passed through the complex. Each tower contained 3 control stairwells, which ran essentially from top to bottom, and 99 elevators. Generally, elevators originating in the lobby ran to sky lobbies on the highest floors, where additional elevators carried passengers on the tops of the buildings. Stairwells A and C ran from the 110th floor to the raised mezzanine level of the lobby. Stairwell B ran from the 107th floor to level B6, 6 floors below the ground, and was accessible from the West Street lobby level, which was 1 floor below the mezzanine. All 3 stairwells ran essentially straight up and down, except for 2 deviations in stairwell A and C, where the staircase jutted out toward the perimeter of the building. On the upper and lower boundaries of these deviations were transfer hallways contained within the stairway proper. Each hallway contained smoke doors to prevent smoke from rising from lower to upper portions of the building. They were kept closed but not locked. Doors leading from tenant space into the stairwells were never kept locked. Re-entry from the stairwells was generally possible on every 4th floor. Doors leading to the roof were locked. There was no rooftop evacuation plan. The roofs of both the North and South Tower were sloped and cluttered surfaces with radiation hazards, making them impractical for helicopter landings and as staging areas for civilians. Though the South Tower roof had a helipad, it did not meet 1994 Federal Aviation Administration guidelines. The 1993 terrorist bombings of the World Trade Center and the Port Authority's response were unlike most of America. New York City, and specifically the World Trade Center, had been the target of terrorist attacks before 9/11. At 12:18 p.m. on February 26, 1993, a 1,500-pound bomb stashed in a rental van was detonated on the parking garage beneath the Twin Towers. The explosion killed 6 people, injured about 1,000 more, and exposed vulnerabilities in the World Trade Centers and the city's emergency preparedness. Towers lost power and communications capability. Generators had to be shut down to ensure safety, and elevators stopped. The public address system and emergency lighting systems failed. The unlit stairwells filled with smoke and were so dark as to be impassable. Rescue efforts by the Fire Department of New York were hampered by the inability of its radios to function in buildings as large as the Twin Towers. The 9/11 emergency call system was overwhelmed. The general evacuation of the tower's occupants via the stairwells took more than 4 hours. Several small groups of people who were physically unable to descend stairs were evacuated from the roof of the South Tower by New York Police Department helicopters. At least one person was lifted from the North Tower roof by the New York Police Department in a dangerous helicopter wrapped operation 15 hours after the bombing. General knowledge that these air rescues had occurred appeared to have left a number of civilians who worked in the Twin Towers with the false impression that helicopter rescues were part of the World Trade Center evacuation plan, and that rescue from the roof was a viable, if not favored, option for those who worked on the upper floors. Although they were considered after 1993, helicopter evacuations, in fact, were not incorporated into the World Trade Center fire safety plan. To address the problems encountered during the response to the 1983 World Trade Center bombing, the Port Authority spent an initial $100 million to make physical, structural, and technological improvements to the World Trade Center, as well as to enhance its fire safety plan and reorganize and bolster its fire safety and security staffs. Substantial enhancements were made to power sources and exits. Fluorescent signs and markings were added in the near stairwells. The Port Authority also installed a sophisticated computerized fire system with redundant electronics and control panels, as well as state-of-the-art fire command stations were placed in the lobby of each tower. To manage fire emergency preparedness operations, the Port Authority created the dedicated position of the safety director. The director supervised a team of deputy fire safety directors, one of whom was on duty at the fire command section in the lobby of each tower at all times. He or she would be responsible for communicating with building occupants during an emergency. Port Authority also sought to prepare civilians better for future emergencies. Deputy fire safety directors conducted fire drills at least twice a year with advance notice to tenants. Fire safety teams were elected from among civilian employees on each floor and consisted of a fire warden, deputy fire warden, and searchers. Standard procedure for fire drills was for fire wardens to lead co-workers in their respective areas to the center of the floor, where they would use the emergency intercom phone to obtain specific information on how to proceed. Some civilians have told us at the commission that their evacuation on September 11th was greatly aided by changes in training implemented by the Port Authority in response to 1993 World Trade Center bombing. During these drills, civilians were not directed into the stairwells or provided with information about their configuration and about the existence of transfer hallways and smoke doors. Neither full nor partial evacuation drills were held. Moreover, participation in drills that were held varied greatly from tenant to tenant. In general, civilians were never told not to evacuate up. Standard fire drill advised participants that in the event of an actual emergency, they would be directed to descend to at least 3 floors below the fire. Most civilians recall simply being taught to await the instructions that would be provided at the time of the emergency. Civilians were not informed that rooftop evacuations were not part of the evacuation plan or that doors to the roof were kept locked. The Port Authority acknowledges that it had no protocol for rescuing people trapped above a fire in the towers. 6 weeks before the September 11th attacks, control of the World Trade Center was transferred by net lease to a private developer, Silverstein Properties. Select Port Authority employees were designated to assist with the transition. Others remained on site but were no longer part of the official chain of command. However, on September 11th, most Port Authority World Trade Center development teams, including those not on the designated transition teams, reported to their regular stations to provide assistance throughout the morning. Although Silverstein Properties was in charge of the World Trade Center on September 11th, the World Trade Center fire safety plan remained essentially the same. On September 11th, the principal first responders were from the Fire Department New York, the New York Police Department, the Port Authority Police Department, and the Mayor's Office of Emergency Management. The Port Authority of New York and the New Jersey Police Department consisted of 1,331 officers, many of whom were trained in fire suppression methods as well as in law enforcement. The Port Authority Police Department was led by a superintendent. There was a separate police department command for each of the Port Authority's 9 facilities, including the World Trade Center. Most Port Authority police commands used ultra-high frequency radios, although all the radios were capable of using more than one channel. Most Port Authority police officers used one local channel. The local channels were low wattage and worked only in the immediate vicinity of that command. The Port Authority Police Department also had an agency-wide channel, but not all commands could access it. As of September 11th, the Port Authority lacked any standard operating procedures to govern how officers from multiple commands would respond to and them be staged and utilized at a major incident at the World Trade Center. In particular, there were no standard operating procedures covering how different commands should communicate via radio during an incident. 40,000 officers of the NYPD was headed by a police commissioner whose duties were not primarily operational, but who retained operational authority. Much of the NYPD's operational activities were run by the chief of department. In the event of a major emergency, a leading role would be played by the Special Operations Division. This division included the aviation unit, which provided helicopters for surveys and rescues, and the emergency service unit, which carried out specialized rescue missions. The NYPD had specific and detailed standard operating procedures for the dispatch of officers to an incident depending on the incident's magnitude. The NYPD precincts were divided into 35 different radio zones, with a central radio dispatcher assigned to each of those zones. In addition, there were several radio channels for citywide operations. Officers had portable radios with 20 or more available channels so that the user could respond outside his or her precinct. Emergency standard unit teams also had these channels, but an operation could be used as a separate point-to-point channel, which was not monitored by a dispatcher. The NYPD also supervised the city's 911 emergency call system. Its approximately 1,200 operators, radio dispatchers, and supervisors were civilian employees of the NYPD. They were trained in the rudimentary of emergency response. When a 911 call concerned a fire, it was transferred to the Fire Department of New York Dispatch. The Fire Department of New York consisted of 11,000 members and was headed by a fire commissioner who, unlike the police commissioner, lacked operational authority. Operations were headed by the chief of department, the sole 5-star chief. The FDNY was organized in 9 separate geographic divisions. Each division was further divided in between 4 to 7 battalions. Each battalion contained typically between 3 and 4 engine companies and 2 to 4 ladder companies. In total, the Fire Department of New York had 205 engine companies and 133 ladder companies. In total, Fire Department of New York, which consisted of all these units, had an on-duty ladder company consisted of a captain or lieutenant, and 5 firefighters. On-duty engine companies consisted of a captain or lieutenant and normally 4 firefighters. Ladder company's primary function was to conduct rescues. Engine companies focused on extinguishing fires. The Fire Department of New York Specialized Operations Command contained a limited number of units that were of particular importance in responding to a terrorist attack or other major incident. The department's 5 rescue companies and 7 squad companies performed specialized and highly risky rescue operations. The logistics of fire operations were directed by the Fire Dispatch Operations Division, which had a center in each of the 5 boroughs. All 911 calls concerning fire emergencies were transferred to FDNY Dispatch. As of September 11th, Fire Department of New York companies and chiefs responding to a fire used analog point-to-point radios that had 6 normal operating channels. Typically, the companies would operate on the same tactical channel, which chiefs on the scene would monitor and use to communicate with the firefighters. Chiefs in a fire operation also use a separate command channel. Because these point-to-point radios had weak signal strength, communications on them could be heard only by other FDNY personnel in the immediate vicinity. In addition, the Fire Department of New York had a dispatch frequency for each of the 5 boroughs that were not point-to-point channels and could be monitored from around the city. The Fire Department of New York radio performed poorly during the 1993 World Trade Center bombing for two reasons. First, the radio signals often did not succeed in penetrating the numerous steel and concrete floors that separated companies attempting to communicate. And second, so many different companies were attempting to use the same point-to-point channel that communications became unintelligible. Port Authority installed at its own expense a repeater system that basically, in 1994, was to greatly enhance the Fire Department of New York's radio communications in the difficult high-rise environment of the World Trade Center. The Port Authority recommended leaving the repeater system on at all times. The Fire Department of New York requested, however, that the repeater be turned on only when it was actually needed because the channel could cause interference with other Fire Department operations in Lower Manhattan. The repeater system was installed at the Port Authority Police Desk at 5 World Trade Center to be activated by members of the Port Authority Police when the Fire Department of New York units responding to the complex so requested. However, in the spring of 2000, Fire Department of New York asked that an activation console for the repeater system be placed instead in the lobby fire safety desk of each of the towers, making the Fire Department of New York personnel entirely responsible for its activation. The Port Authority complied. Between 1998 and 2000, fewer people died from fires in New York City than in any period since accurate measurements began in 1946. Firefighter deaths, a total of 22 during the 1990s, compared favorably with the most tranquil periods in the department's history. In 1996, Mayor Rudolph Giuliani created the Mayor's Office of Emergency Management, which had three basic functions. First, OEM's Watch Command was to monitor the city's key communications channels, including radio frequency of Fire Department, New York Dispatch, and the New York Police Department, and other data. The second purpose of the Office of Emergency Management was to improve New York City's response to major incidents, including terrorist attacks, by planning, conducting exercises and drills that would involve multiple city agencies, particularly the NYPD and the FDNY. Third, the Office of Emergency Management played a crucial role in managing the city's overall response to an incident. After the Office of Emergency Management's Emergency Operations Center was activated, designated liaisons from relevant agencies, as well as the mayor and his or her senior staff, would respond there. In addition, an Office of Emergency Management field responder would be sent to the scene to ensure that the response was coordinated. The OEM's headquarters was located at 7 World Trade Center. Some questioned locating in both so close to a previous terrorist target and on the 23rd floor of a building difficult to access should elevators become inoperable. There was no backup site. In July of 2001, Mayor Giuliani updated a directive entitled Direction and Control of Emergencies in the City of New York. Purpose was to eliminate potential conflict among responding agencies, which may have areas of overlapping expertise and responsibility. The directive sought to accomplish this objective by designating, for different types of emergencies, an appropriate agency as incident commander. This incident commander would be responsible for the management of the city's response to the emergency, while the Office of Emergency Management was designated the on-scene interagency coordinator. Nevertheless, Fire Department of New York and the New York Police Department each considered itself operational autonomous. As of September 11th, they were not prepared to comprehensively coordinate their efforts in responding to a major incident. The Office of Emergency Management had not overcome this problem.